Japanese woodblock printing has been around since the 700s, but was still a popular art form as far as the 19th century. Its combination of design and woodworking intrigued me, and so for this project, I decided to create my own basic woodblock print. I started by creating the design for the final print. I drew up a butterfly pattern that I had seen and added some Japanese characters in Photoshop. If I got them right, they should say love, joy, and happiness. I set the dimensions of the canvas to the dimensions of the woodblock I had, so I was able to simply print the pattern to its actual size. Since a woodblock is essentially a stamp, the pattern has to be transferred and carved backwards, so I actually flipped the entire design in Photoshop before transferring it. I secured a 4x8 block of cherry from a friend's scrap pile and set to work transferring the design. I covered the back of the pattern in black chalk, taped it to the block, and traced over all the outlines with a ballpoint pen. This leaves a chalk pattern on the actual wood. I then went over the entire design in ink. After a while, it was finally prepared for carving. Now, carving was a very experimental and time-consuming process. I started off with a set of smaller, cheaper chisels on a shaky table using only the force of my hands. After several mistakes on the first character, I took the project outside, sharpened some larger chisels, and started using a small hammer for the extra force. This process was much smarter and helped move the carving along much quicker. Nevertheless, I still made several slip-ups. These first two characters convinced me that 1. I needed to practice more carving, and 2. This project, like many others, was going to take way longer than I had anticipated. When paper is laid over the block, only raised areas will transfer ink, so you essentially need to carve away everything but the design. The general technique is to make angled cuts outlining the pattern. Use gouges or sometimes large chisels to clear out the excess area, and then use flat chisels to come up to the outline. Occasionally the chisel would slip, chipping off part of the design by accident. As you can see, one of these slippages actually found my finger before damaging the wood. I fixed both these issues with superglue. The total carving process probably took about 8 or 9 hours, but time flies when you're having fun. When carving the curvy designs on the butterfly, I couldn't afford to cut straight down since the small pieces need all the support they can get. So I ended up using a small sharp chisel to cut in at an angle and then meet it from the other side. This worked well, and the shallow V-cuts were enough to keep the ink off the paper. Cherry is a pretty hard wood with a very tight grain. This makes it possible to carve small, intricate designs, such as this one. I used a wire brush to clean up small areas as I went, and in the end I used a gouge to make uniform cuts into all the waste areas. This made the whole block look more professional and clean. With the block finally finished up, I started preparing the paper. Japanese printers are very particular about their paper. I simply used a variety of craft papers that I thought looked absorbent, including some watercolor paper. The paper has to be moist in order to soak in the ink, so after cutting, I laid each sheet in between damp newspaper in a plastic shoebox and added some pressure. Then came the first print. Using a small foam brush I had constructed, I covered the blank in blue calligraphy ink. With high hopes, I laid down a sheet, rubbed it in with some cloth in my hands, and pulled it off. I quickly figured out how difficult getting a good print was without the proper tools. A roller would have applied ink quickly and evenly, and a proper baren to rub the paper in would have made the process more uniform. Nevertheless, after many prints, I figured out a good level of dampness to aim for with the paper. And I practiced getting the ink on quickly and heavily so that enough would absorb. In the end, some of the paper stuck to the block, some absorbed too little or too much, and some shifted during the process. But after much experimentation, I had about 4 prints that I was proud of. Each of these spent a little time wrapped in newspaper underneath an SAT book to try to flatten them out as they dried. After lots of work and lots of failing, I really liked the way my final few prints turned out. This project was really fun and, though fairly amateur when compared to authentic printmaking, was a great way to explore the history and technique behind a traditional art form.